In June of 1816, high above Lake Geneva in Switzerland, five young intellectuals locked themselves inside a grand estate known as Villa Diodati. Among them were the radical poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, his 18-year-old lover Mary Godwin, and the notorious Lord Byron. They had come to the Swiss Alps expecting a warm European summer, sweeping views of sun-drenched vineyards, tranquil waters, and endless blue skies. Instead, they found an apocalypse in miniature. Day after day, a heavy, sulfur-colored gloom hung over the landscape. Thunderstorms rattled the shutters with relentless violence. The sun, when it appeared at all, was reduced to a pale, eerie red disk suspended behind a thick veil of haze. The cold was bitter, unnatural, and suffocating. Trapped indoors by the endless rain, huddled around a flickering fireplace, Lord Byron posed a challenge to his guests. "We will each write a ghost story." 18-year-old Mary Godwin lay awake that night, listening to the howling wind outside. In the oppressive dark, her imagination conjured a terrifying vision. A pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside a creature assembled from human remains. A monster brought to life by the spark of science. Mary's vision became Frankenstein, the first modern science fiction novel. Byron would write his apocalyptic poem Darkness, depicting a world where the sun was extinguished and humanity turned to madness. None of them knew why the world had turned black. They had no access to satellite imagery, no global telecommunications, no understanding of atmospheric science. They believed they were simply witnessing the end of days. What they didn't know was that the nightmare over Switzerland was caused by an event thousands of miles away, a monster that had woken up on the other side of the planet 1 year earlier. To understand the nightmare of 1816, we have to travel back to April 5, 1815, to the island of Sumbawa in the Dutch East Indies, modern-day Indonesia. Towering over the island was Mount Tambora, a sleeping giant standing over 13,000 feet high. For over 3 centuries, Tambora had been quiet. Villages thrived along its slopes, surrounded by dense rainforests and fertile agricultural land. Then, the mountain shuddered. On the evening of April 5th, a massive detonation shook the island. British forces stationed in Java, more than 800 miles away, heard thunderous booms so loud they mistook them for distant naval gunfire, and dispatched troops to investigate. But that initial explosion was merely a warning shot. 5 days later, on April 10th, Mount Tambora detonated completely. Witnesses on neighboring islands reported seeing 3 towering columns of liquid fire shoot into the sky, merging into a single massive cauldron of flame. The entire mountain seemed to turn into a flowing mass of liquid fire. In a matter of hours, pyroclastic flows, superheated avalanches of gas, ash, and pumice traveling at hundreds of miles per hour, raced down the slopes. They obliterated everything in their path, instantly vaporizing entire villages and killing over 10,000 people on Sumbawa almost instantly. The blast was a colossal volcanic explosivity index, VEI, 7 event. It was the most powerful volcanic eruption in recorded human history, roughly 10,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima, and 4 times more powerful than the legendary eruption of Krakatoa in 1883. Mount Tambora didn't just erupt, it annihilated itself. The mountain lost over 4,000 feet of its height in a single day, leaving behind a gaping caldera 3 miles wide and nearly a mile deep, for hundreds of miles around. Total darkness descended. Ash fell from the sky like heavy gray snow, crushing roofs and suffocating livestock. The ocean turned black, choked with massive floating rafts of pumice that trapped ships in harbor. The immediate devastation was staggering. Around 12,000 people died directly from the blast and pyroclastic flows. Over the following weeks, an estimated 80,000 more across the region perished from starvation and disease, as ash poisoned water supplies and buried crops. Yet, Tambora's true destruction was only just beginning. The mountain had launched its ultimate weapon high above the clouds. During the eruption, Tambora blasted roughly 150 cubic kilometers of rock, ash, and debris into the atmosphere. But the solid ash wasn't the primary killer of global climate. The fine ash fell back to Earth within days and weeks. The real catalyst was sulfur dioxide gas. Tambora hurled over 60 million tons of sulfur dioxide gas directly into the stratosphere, more than 30 miles high, up in the stratosphere, above the weather systems that usually wash the sky clean with rain. The gas reacted with water vapor to form a fine mist of microscopic aerosol particles, sulfuric acid droplets. This invisible, toxic cloud did not stay over Indonesia, caught in the high-altitude jet streams. The aerosol shroud spread across the globe like a rising tide of poison. Within months, it encircled the Earth, forming an atmospheric mirror. These microscopic sulfuric particles acted as a planetary shield, reflecting a significant portion of incoming sunlight back out into space. The global temperature plunged. The world was sliding into a volcanic winter, and humanity had no idea what was coming. By early 1816, the aerosol veil was fully deployed over the northern hemisphere. In North America, the spring of 1816 began normally enough. Farmers in New England plowed their fields and planted their corn, wheat, and vegetables. But as May turned into June, the weather didn't warm up. It turned violently backward. On June 6, 1816, a massive polar air mass collided with the atmospheric haze over eastern North America. Snow began to fall across New England, New York, and eastern Canada. In Vermont, snowdrifts reached 18 inches high. Farmers in Massachusetts watched in horror as icy frosts killed off their newly sprouted crops overnight. Farmers replanted in mid-June, praying for warmth. But in July, another Arctic freeze struck. Rivers froze over in Connecticut. Icicles hung from roofs. In the middle of summer, fields of corn, vulnerable to the cold, withered and turned black. In New England, 1816 earned nicknames that painted a bleak picture. 1800 froze to death, the poverty year, and the year without a summer. The situation in Europe was even worse. Europe was already reeling from the devastation of the Napoleonic Wars, which had ended just a year prior. Millions of people were impoverished, displaced, and struggling to rebuild. Then, the weather turned hostile. From Britain to Italy, relentless, freezing rains poured down throughout the summer months. In Ireland, rain fell on 8-week streaks without stopping. Rivers flooded their banks, washing away bridges, drowning livestock, and rotting wheat crops directly in the soil. In Switzerland, where Mary Shelley was writing her ghost story, temperatures plummeted to record lows. Huge glaciers in the Alps expanded, creeping down valleys and destroying entire mountain villages. As crops failed on a global scale, the fragile dominoes of early 19th century society began to collapse. Food prices soared overnight. In Britain and France, the price of grain tripled. Wheat and corn became luxury items that only the wealthy could afford. The working poor were reduced to desperate measures, eating wild herbs, nettles, boiled sawdust, and rotting potatoes to survive. In Ireland, families killed their draft horses for meat. With starvation came civil unrest. Bread riots erupted across Europe. Hungry crowds looted bakeries, burned grain stores, and clashed violently with soldiers. In France, armed guards were forced to escort grain wagons from farms to cities to prevent them from being hijacked by desperate mobs. In England, protesters took to the streets under banners reading, "Bread or blood." In the wake of starvation came disease. The unseasonal rain and cold created ideal conditions for a devastating typhus epidemic, carried by lice among displaced, weakened populations. Typhus swept through Ireland and mainland Europe, killing an estimated 200,000 people. In Asia, the altered climate disrupted the annual monsoon cycles. The global cooling broke the traditional rainfall patterns, causing catastrophic droughts, followed by unprecedented flooding in India. This climate disruption triggered a novel strain of cholera in Bengal, which mutated and spread across the globe in a world-spanning pandemic that lasted for decades. In North America, thousands of desperate farmers abandoned their ruined farms in New England, packing their few belongings onto wagons. They joined a massive westward exodus across the Appalachian Mountains toward the Midwest, seeking warmer, more forgiving soil. This wave of climate refugees accelerated the settlement of states like Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. By 1817, the sulfur shroud high in the stratosphere slowly began to disperse. Sunlight returned to the Earth. Global temperatures stabilized, and crops grew once more. The crisis faded into history, But the imprint of 1816 remained permanently etched into human culture. Desperation often fuels human innovation. In Germany, as horse feed became impossibly scarce, and thousands of horses died of starvation, an inventor named Karl Dreis sought a mode of personal transport that didn't rely on animals. His invention? The loft machine, or running machine, the direct precursor to the modern bicycle. In chemistry, the crop failures inspired a young German chemist named Justus von Liebig. Moved by the horrific starvation he witnessed as a child in 1816, Liebig dedicated his life to plant nutrition, ultimately inventing modern chemical fertilizers, a technology that today feeds billions of people worldwide. In art, the volcanic haze created breathtaking, blood-red sunsets across Europe. The British painter J.M.W. Turner captured these luminous, sulfurous skies on canvas, creating masterpieces that changed landscape painting forever. And in literature, the gloomy, freezing summer on Lake Geneva produced two foundational pillars of modern horror: Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and John Polidori's The Vampire, the story that launched the modern vampire genre. The story of 1816 is a sobering reminder of a fundamental truth. Humanity lives at the mercy of the Earth's natural systems. A single mountain, waking up on a distant island, possessed enough power to alter the atmosphere, redraw map boundaries, spark revolutions, reshape culture, and bring the human race to its knees. The sun eventually returned in 1817, but the year without a summer stands as a warning written in frost and ash, a reminder of how fragile our world really is.